So what is the current state of the Star Wars fandom? I feel like that's a really important and yet interesting question to ask ourselves because I think depending on what part of the fandom you're in, what your opinions are on Star Wars, it may differ on what you think the current state of the fandom is. You have, at least in my time, I've been doing the little Star Wars gig, if you will, for, I'd say about 6 years now. And when I started out on Instagram, the main battle between Star Wars fans, this is before the sequels came out, mind you, was the prequels versus the originals. You had the prequel fans who were kind of coming of age and saying, you know what, the prequels may not have been as good as the originals, but I think you guys gave them way too much hate. And that was the big battle for a while of, are the prequels underrated, overrated, or are they not rated properly? I mean, just the thought that the prequels and George Lucas and his Star Wars were kind of the debate for a little while. And I know that may seem like a long forgotten history amongst a lot of Star Wars fans, but the division in the Star Wars fandom has started since 1997 when the special editions came out. That's when Star Wars fans truly said, alright, now we're having differing opinions with the creator. And we still have differing opinions with George Lucas. But now that he has left the franchise since 2012, sold it to Disney, and Disney has taken over and made the sequel films, we have different parts of the fandom now. We have people who are prequel fans, which I would assume means they like both the prequels and the originals. You have your sequel trilogy fans, which means they either like the sequels and the originals, but maybe they like the prequels, or maybe they don't. Then you got your original trilogy fans, or people like me, who I call myself an OT purist, where when you guys argue about the prequels and the sequels, it really means nothing to me because neither of them are ever going to be as good as the originals, and both are pretty flawed, and I mean heavily flawed in their own right, but one being more flawed than the other is a debate you fans can work out amongst yourselves, because in the end, I don't care which one's better than the other. But that really does show, in my opinion, how many different views we have and takes we have in the Star Wars fandom, how many niche communities we almost have in the Star Wars fandom. One thing I've realized over the past 2 to 3 years is that there's so many different communities in the Star Wars fandom. You have communities in the gaming community, like Battlefront 2 has a big community around it still. You also have the community around Galaxy Heroes. I didn't realize that was a big community until the past month or so. Then you have the communities with the saber community. I used to be a big saber enthusiast, where you would build your own custom lightsabers, and they've been a big part of the Star Wars fandom for a very, very long time. You have the cosplaying community. The 501st is what they call them. Very nice and charitable organization, but they've become such a big part of the Star Wars fandom that you now see them involved with things like The Mandalorian. My point here is that there's so many different Star Wars fans out there, people who are into the cosplaying, the video game. I didn't even mention the people who go autograph collecting and collect the merchandise and the toys, and people who are into like the Black Series that are coming out and everything. There's so many different parts of the fandom. To say that Star Wars is dead, though, I think that's just such a generalized statement that it almost can never be true. Maybe in the year 2077, maybe even the year 2050 or 2040, you can tell me Star Wars is dead, and I might believe you. But with the way things stand right now, you saying Star Wars is dead means nothing to me, because I heard the same thing back when the prequels came out. So what is the current state of the fandom? Where does everyone lie at right now? I think there's a part of the fandom who is optimistic about the future of Star Wars. There's a big part of the fandom that is the vocal minority in some sense, who, and you can call them the fandom menace if you will, you can call them, some of them are prequel fans, you can call them whatever you want, but there is a group of the fan base that truly does not like the new Disney Star Wars, and that's understandable. I've been a vocal critic of a lot of the things Disney has done with Star Wars underneath their reign, but at some point you do have to move on a little bit, and that's one thing I've noticed with the fandom menace side of things, is that they're holding on to hating Star Wars. It's not about loving Star Wars anymore, or liking it, or focusing on the good aspects of Star Wars. It's simply going off of a certain narrative of Disney Star Wars is bad. And you kind of see this now where the fandom menace is kind of collapsing in on each other, where they're all debating and then no one really knows what the whole movement or meaning behind the thing is. It's very confusing, and I think it's very hard to have a fan base or a movement in the fandom built around hating something. The Phantom Menace did not come out until, after The Last Jedi? Why is that? Because people like me and a lot of other people did not like the film, but why do we still constantly hate on it? I mean, was it a bad film? In my opinion, yes. So some people like the film, some people don't, but I didn't like the film, and a lot of the people didn't like the film. But do we constantly talk about the film every day? I mean, there's a subreddit literally 3 hours ago. There is a post that says, a relevant time to remind fans that Rian Johnson used a heinous and terribly racist meme to troll a fan plus other musings. It's just stuff like that where it's like, people are obsessed with Rian Johnson. There's like 2 or 3 guys. I know there's one guy who's really popular who has like a Rian Johnson meme account on Twitter. And literally he spent the past year or two obsessing over Rian Johnson and just poking fun at him and making memes. But there comes a point where it's like, I get the satire, but there also comes a point where it's a little pathetic and kind of creepy that these people are so obsessed with Rian Johnson that, I mean, I noticed it with my YouTube algorithm. The second I put a Rian Johnson name in the title or a picture of him or Kathy Kennedy, people come out of the woodwork just to hate on them, just to give their big opinions on them of, oh, I can't stand, like, I truly don't understand when people are like, Kathy Kennedy, has no good film experience, she doesn't know what she's doing. It's like, dude, I agree that she's been a bad producer for the Star Wars films, but there's certain things that are just factually incorrect. And saying that she's not been a good producer or has no film experience, has been in the field for a long time. Some people said she just got the coffee, for people like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. Like, have you ever worked on a film production? Do you know what film production's like? Do you know what a producer does? You have these people like Doomcock who comes out with these fake conspiracy theories, rumors, and news stuff every week. And that side of the fandom eats it up because they truly hate, and I mean it, they hate the people at Lucasfilm, and they hate the people like Kathy Kennedy and Rian Johnson, and it's kind of a toxic part of the fandom that really doesn't see the hypocriticalness. They don't see the hypocriticalness of what happened with the prequels when those came out, where fans looked at other fans and said, you're not a Star Wars fan if you like the prequels. Now the prequel fans and even the fandom ministers are doing the same thing to the sequel fans, of saying, if you like the sequels, then you're not a Star Wars fan. You don't know what real Star Wars is. That's the thing people try to do. They try to act like they have some ownership on, and it's like gatekeeping on what you can and cannot be a fan of if you're in the Star Wars fandom. There's even that documentary, The People versus George Lucas, that everyone hated so much when it came out because of the name alone, but when you actually watch the documentary, you realize in some sense it is a love letter to George Lucas. In some sense it's also a critique of the man, and that's what you're not allowed to do anymore in the fandom, is you're not allowed to critique George Lucas. There's no criticism you can ever have for George Lucas, and people act like, oh, if George Lucas came back, he would save Star Wars. Forgetting the fact that George Lucas sold Star Wars. Forgetting the fact that George Lucas gave the responsibility of the Star Wars franchise to Kathy Kennedy herself. He handpicked her. So are you guys going to say George was wrong now? Are you going to criticize him for that? I mean, I just find it fascinating, the state of the fandom right now. The future of Star Wars right now is a little uncertain, but short term it's certain. We have a lot of futures, spin-off shows on Disney Plus and series and all that stuff. But even after the Clone Wars ended, it was the most popular and most highly demanded show of that time period when it came out, and it finished up in May, on May 4th itself, but the months before that it was doing extremely well in terms of the demand that people had for this. So the fact that that was number 1, and Mandalorian was number 2, and then Stranger Things was number 3, I think that shows that Star Wars truly is not dead. You can just say Star Wars is dead just because you think it's dead, but it doesn't mean it's actually dead. There's so many parts of the fandom that keep Star Wars alive through their own fan films, through their own fan edits, through their own versions and ideologies of Star Wars. I think it's never going to die out. I think it's going to be one of those things that we may not see as many films in the future, and we may not even like all the films and content that comes out from Star Wars in the future, but that doesn't mean we still can't enjoy what we love and liked about Star Wars. And so I think that right now the future of Star Wars is a lot more bright than it was back in even 2015 and 2014 when we were getting the sequel trilogy. Because with the sequel trilogy, we knew the story was going to come to an end, and we kind of knew what the story was going to be about. There wasn't as much risk going into the sequel trilogy because you know you had to wrap up the story between Luke, Han, and Leia. Now, did I like the way that story ended? Absolutely not. If I could take it all back, I promise to God I would. But with that said, now that we're done with the Skywalker saga, now that we're going into this new High Republic era, maybe we have a new film by Taika Waititi, we have J.D. Dillard, who's supposed to be making a Star Wars film, Kevin Feige is producing a Star Wars film, we also have Rian Johnson's trilogy supposedly in the work. Maybe he won't write and direct all three of them, maybe he'll bring in another director or two to direct some of them. We really don't know what the films are going to be like, but now you truly are going to see the creativeness of Star Wars come out. We're getting a new era. We're getting new video games as well, exploring new aspects. I love Jedi Fallen Order. I can't wait to see the sequel to that game. And now I'm trying to think of what comes with Taika's film in 2024. What comes after that with the Star Wars films? Because they're not going to stop making Star Wars films. But we know that it's not going to be set during that sequel trilogy era. It's not going to be 10, 11, and 12. It's going to be something completely different. It's not going to be spin-off films. It's going to be a new era of Star Wars that we're exploring, a new aspect of Star Wars that we get to explore. Maybe the Dawn of the Jedi. That's what the David Benioff and D.B. Weiss Star Wars trilogy was supposed to be about. The Dawn of the Jedi and discovering the Force. There's a lot of possibilities we have now in the Star Wars universe that I think saying that it's dead simply because we didn't like the ending of a story, I think it's a little foolhardy. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Is Star Wars dead? What is the current state of the fandom? If I had to give a overall whole aspect picture of the fandom, I would say a little bit of uncertainty. That we're not really certain what the future of Star Wars is right now. You have parts of the fandom who hate Star Wars. You have parts of the fandom who don't think Star Wars has a future. And then you have another part of the fandom who's completely fine with the current state of Star Wars and is excited to see where it goes. But there's so many different subgenres and categories of Star Wars fans, it truly is hard to get everyone's personal take and each community's thoughts on the current state of Star Wars. How can we get that? I want to know, how can we figure out what we Star Wars fans feel? You guys come back to me with an answer, and I'll come back with a response in a week. But tell me your thoughts below. I'm Star Wars Only. Hope you guys enjoyed this talk. Sorry if it was a little long-winded. If you did like it, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It does help out the channel. I'm Star Wars Only. I will see you all next time, and may the Force be with you always.